The night silenced the Leicestershire countryside beneath a shroud of warm August dark, but every copse and hedgerow around Redemore Plain seemed alive with the pulse of restless hearts. Torchlight flickered against canvas in two rival camps only 3 miles apart, and the smell of wood smoke mingled with damp peat and trampled barley. On Ambion Hill, the larger host slept under the white and murrey banners of King Richard III, last crowned warrior of the Plantagenet line, while across a scatter of marshy ground, Henry Tudor, Earl of Richmond, paced a borrowed pavilion, rehearsing the fragile arithmetic of dawn. One bold strike, one wavering ally, one chance to wrench a kingdom from the House of York. In its quiet way, the soil itself waited to remember every hoofprint and broken spear. Because after sunrise on 22nd August 1485, England would no longer be the land it had been for 30 bitter years of dynastic war. Richard Plantagenet, Duke of Gloucester turned king, had worn the crown barely 26 months, yet his reign already carried the weight of legend and suspicion. Some hailed him as the stalwart guardian who kept the realm from a Woodville coup. Others whispered the darker tale of 2 lost princes in the Tower and a sovereign whose white boar badge cloaked a ruthless heart. Whether hero or usurper, Richard commanded near 12,000 men. Retainers of John Howard, Duke of Norfolk, massed in steel brigandines, the North Country archers of Henry Percy, Earl of Northumberland, hard-eyed veterans of Scottish marches, and a disciplined artillery train that had rattled south from York along the Great North Road. He rode a war horse, caparisoned in cloth of blue and murrey, crowned helm gleaming, and in his hand he carried the same steel battle-axe he had borne at Barnet and Tewkesbury, proof that he understood violence not merely in theory, but at the crash of blade on bone. Across the low ground, Henry Tudor held scarcely 8,000 souls, many of them Welsh spearmen recruited on his improbable march inland from Milford Haven. Lean French mercenaries hired by Charles VIII clustered round a handful of light guns. Oxfordshire yeomen under John de Vere, Earl of Oxford, formed the core of an English vanguard still nursing exile's hunger after years on the continent. Henry himself had never commanded in battle, yet exile had tempered him like hard steel plunged in water. He spoke softly, but every syllable carried the weight of a claim sanctioned by Lancastrian blood and papal blessing. Most important of all, he bore a secret understanding with Thomas Stanley, Lord of Latham, and Sir William Stanley, brothers whose combined levy of 6,000 men loitered west of Dadlington. Their banners showed the eagle and child, but their intentions, if measured by word alone, were smoke on a shifting wind. Richard had taken Lord Stanley's son as hostage against treachery. Henry wagered that family loyalty, ambition, or mere calculation would outweigh paternal fear. The board was set with pieces both bold and inscrutable. Long before sunrise, camp priests muttered matins over flickering tapers. Richard donned harness with ritual exactitude, every leather strap buckled by squires whose breaths quivered in the chill. When he stepped from his royal pavilion, waiting knights hailed him with a roar. "Gloucester and England!" He raised a gauntleted hand in acknowledgement, but felt gravity tug behind his breastbone. Inside the Privy Council tent, his astrologers had warned that Mars lay darkly aspected. Yet Richard dismissed star fear as goose's chatter. The fates of men, he insisted, were minted in steel. Still, he ordered lines shaken from slumber hours earlier than custom, perhaps sensing the day's margin would be razor thin. Henry's command tent, by contrast, crackled with urgent hope. Jasper Tudor, seasoned veteran of decades-long struggle, clasped his nephew's forearm and spoke in clipped Welsh. John de Vere delivered a terse plan. Place seasoned Oxfordshire billmen at the van, keep Henry sheltered within the reserve, and trust that the Stanleys would strike when fortunes leaned, Yorkist and ransom beckoned richer than oaths. Drums beat hollow on rawhide. A French gunner kissed a small bronze culverin named La Belle Margot. Rhys ap Thomas knelt to swear that if Henry did not receive the crown this day, by God's blood this blade will never again be sheathed. Dawn smeared the eastern sky in a pallid ribbon as men tightened straps, whispered prayers, and pressed lovers' tokens to their lips. The battlefield itself opened like a shallow amphitheater. Ambion Hill rose gently on the Yorkist right and center, its slopes stubbled with cut hay and stooked oats. To the east lay a snarl of hedges cuffed against the chantry house. Westwards, the land sagged into the reedy morass of Redemore Marsh, where rushes and stagnant pools waited to bog any horseman reckless enough to charge blind. A track called Fen Lane etched the south edge of the marsh and curved uphill towards Sutton Cheney. Richard claimed the high ground, planting his royal standard, a fearsome white boar rampant, beside scarlet banners embroidered with the arms of St. George. Norfolk's foot formed the vanguard, Northumberland held the rear reserve, and artillery pieces, falconets, serpentines, and ribbalds jutted from the crest like blunt-toothed gargoyles. Far below, Henry arrayed his forces in 3 battles. Oxford's men formed the left and center, their guidons painted with the silver mullet of de Vere. Sir Gilbert Talbot commanded the right. Henry's own banner of the Red Dragon of Cadwallader hovered behind ranks of Welsh pikemen. The French captain Philibert de Chandé oversaw a sprinkling of continental handgunners whose arquebus fire would prove more psychological than lethal. Henry positioned himself not at the vanguard, but among his bodyguard of knights, deferring tactical direction to Oxford, a decision that spoke of humility or inexperience, yet also of trust in the man whose loyalty had never wavered despite 17 years of exile. The Stanleys, meanwhile, took up an ambiguous stance on high ground at Dadlington and Stoke Golding, equal distance from both royal camps. Their banners fluttered innocently in the breeze, a silent reminder that the issue of the day might hinge on more than courage or numbers. At first light, Richard's gunners lit fuses. Thunder split the stillness as iron shots screamed downrange, gouging furrows through damp grass and sending showers of soil across Oxford's forward ranks. Few billets found flesh, too great the distance, but the noise set hearts hammering. Oxford barked a command, Tudor trumpets brayed, and the Lancastrian line surged forward, drums thumping a steady cadence learned during French campaigns. Richard watched from his horse, weighing whether to descend with billmen or break the opposing vanguard by cannon fire alone. Then Norfolk, eager to prove Yorkist steel unbent, urged his banner forward. The Duke's men tramped downhill with halberds leveled, sunlight glancing off salets and brigandines. English archers on Richard's flank loosed storms of arrow hail, their bodkin tips rust-brown in morning glare. It was here the battle's first violent stitch was sown. Oxford's leading files met Norfolk's press of pikes amid a whirl of arrow sleet. Billhooks catching cuirass plates, mallets crunching pauldrons, cries erupting as flesh parted from bone. For half an hour, the 2 vanguards mauled each other like stags, locked antler to antler. Norfolk's courage was ironclad, but Oxford wielded a subtle hand. He curled his left, feigning retreat, to draw Yorkists into the sucking ground fringed by the marsh. A patch of quagmire, invisible beneath reed tufts, swallowed an entire rank of Norfolk's billmen. Those who floundered free did so under arcs of Tudor arrows that stitched them to mud. A gap opened in the Yorkist front, widening as men slipped on carrion-slick turf. Richard dispatched messengers for Northumberland to press forward and seal the breach. Yet Henry Percy, whether by treacherous design or paralyzing caution, did not advance. His North Country spearmen held position on the crest, banners furling idly, their earl a silent silhouette against the sky. Richard felt a twist of anger pierce the leather under his ribs. To his left, the Stanleys still watched, unmoved, their mass of fresh troops like a sword dangling above the fray by a single thread. The king realized the fight might be decided before either neutral magnate lifted a blade, and not in his favor. Norfolk, cut off and reeling, tried to rally at the base of Ambion's western slope, but the tide had turned. An arrow pierced the Duke's visor, lodging near his brain. He sagged, and his household banner dipped. Yorkist morale wavered in equal measure. Sensing blood-steeped opportunity, Oxford signaled a general push. Lancastrian trumpets screamed. Welsh war cries flooded the hollow. Cymru am Baith. Billmen lunged uphill, and French handgunners advanced to within pistol-shot range, belching gouts of sulphurous smoke that rolled across the grass like morning mist. Yorkist guns, hurriedly flanking to cover Norfolk's failing wing, slithered in muddy ruts, their chains snagging in turf. The thunder that had rolled so confident at dawn now stuttered into misfires and frantic swearing. For the first time since he buckled harness, Richard felt the faint, unmistakable chill of jeopardy. It was then, at a hinge moment historians would dissect for centuries, that Richard Plantagenet chose audacity. Spying the Tudor banner of the Red Dragon fluttering some few hundred yards behind Oxford's moving van, the king reasoned that Henry's personal bodyguard must be lightly held. If he could ride through the melee, strike down the pretender, and lift his severed head skyward, the Lancastrian line would disintegrate as surely as sun-dried mortar struck by a hammer. He called his household knights, perhaps 200 in all, around him. Trumpets pealed a steely note, spurs dug flanks, and the last crowned knight in England lowered his lance and drove headlong into history. The charge carved a white-plumed comet trail through dust and clamor, descending Ambion's slope like an avalanche of iron. Richard's standard-bearer, Sir Percival Thirlwall, bore aloft the white boar and the royal arms entwined, refusing to let them dip, though cannon shot tore his thigh and arrowheads riddled his shield. French mercenaries scrambled to form a pike hedgehog, but the momentum of destriers at full gallop shattered their line. Lances crunched, bodies slammed groundward, and into the breach poured gilded armor flashing with Plantagenet suns and roses. Richard unhorsed John Cheney, towering champion of Henry's retinue, with a single swing of his axe, then drove ahead until only a knot of Welsh billmen stood between crown and dragon standard. He hacked down William Brandon, Henry's standard-bearer, splitting silk and rib alike, and for an incandescent instant, the throne of England hung on the arc of one man's blade. But the Stanleys, those masters of timing, had at last chosen a side. Sir William, eyeing the chaos, wheeled his fresh ranks of Cheshire billmen toward the king's exposed flank, while Thomas Stanley's cavalry lurched from Dadlington to cut off any retreat. Reshaped Thomas, bound by oath to place Henry on the throne or die in the attempt, drove his Welsh spears against the rump of Richard's household. Surrounded on every compass point yet still swinging, the king refused to yield. Chroniclers later swore he cried, "Treachery! Treachery! Treachery!" as he struggled like a boar at bay. Thirlwall, though bleeding from every limb, roped the white boar standard round his shattered leg so it would not lie fallen. Hugh Cheney thrust a pike at Richard's horse. The beast reared, hooves flailing. The king tumbled and rose again, helm askew, visage a rictus of fury. Axes crashed on Salé, a mace caved his skull, and the last Plantagenet monarch was hacked down among reeds and crimsoned water, the boar's head badge, once glinting, doused in mire. A hush rippled outward, first among those who watched him fall, then across the broader field as Yorkist ranks grasped that their king was dead. Some tossed weapons and ran. Others surrendered to the encircling Stanleys. Still others fought on in desperate clusters until Oxford's men harried them into the marsh. Northumberland, his reserve intact, withdrew northward in measured order, later pleading that the crush of retreat prevented relief. Norfolk's son, Thomas Howard, fought free with a splintered force, nursing injuries that would scar him into old age. For most of Richard's host, however, the day ended in rout, captains discarding badges to escape vengeance, arquebusiers drowning in bog pools still swirling with charcoal powder. When the sun reached noon height, the clangor shrank to sporadic skirmish. Henry Tudor rode forward beneath tattered banners to a small mound near Sutton Cheney. There, on a makeshift shield throne fashioned from broken spears, Lord Stanley plucked the gold circlet of Richard's helm, dented, mud-caked, a ruby missing, and placed it upon Henry's head. Soldiers cheered, aching throats cracked, and word traveled in mounting echoes. King Henry VII now reigned. Bloodied Welshmen knelt, tears cutting tracks through grime. French mercenaries, suddenly flush with the promise of payment, bellowed, "Vive le roi!" Oxford embraced his new monarch in weary triumph. Henry's first command was for Mass to be sung in thanksgiving. His second to treat prisoners with mercy, a deliberate contrast to the butcheries that had marked earlier chapters of the Wars of the Roses. Richard's corpse, naked, skewered, and slung across a common horse, was paraded through Leicester, one arm dangling like broken rigging, so that subjects might behold the end of tyranny or, in secret hearts, mourn a valiant if unlucky lord. Franciscan brothers buried him in Greyfriars under a hurried slab. The Stanleys were rewarded with earldoms. Reshaped Thomas became Justiciar of South Wales. Northumberland, though suspect, retained his lands to pacify the north. Parliament later ratified Henry's reign retroactively from 23rd August, branding all who had fought for Richard traitors in law to secure forfeitures. Yet Henry shrewdly married Elizabeth of York, weaving white rose and red into a new Tudor emblem. The united rose that would adorn coins, tapestries, and the very rafters of Westminster. Bosworth did more than change a king. It ended an epoch. The high-born private armies that had roamed English shires for 3 decades were disbanded or absorbed into a stronger crown. Gunpowder wrought a slow revolution in castle walls and chivalric combat. The Renaissance, already seeping from Italian courts, found a monarch eager to patronize humanist scholars and Florentine artisans. Across the narrow sea, European kings watched with narrowed eyes as a once fractured England forged a dynasty strong enough to threaten their trade and their thrones. And far downstream, a playwright named William Shakespeare would distill Bosworth into soaring verse, painting Richard Crookback as Night's Child and Henry Richmond as Dawn's Harbinger, ensuring that no gray nuance of realpolitik would dim the moral blaze of Tudor myth. But for those who walked the churned soil that afternoon, the reckoning was simpler and more personal. A father searched reed beds for his son's body and found only a half-shredded livery jacket pinned beneath a war horse. A young groom who had followed Richard from Middleham sobbed as burgesses stripped his lord's armor for trophy. A company of French gunners laughed at newfound riches, while an English archer, nursing a broken arm, wondered whether any king truly spoke for men like him. The Stanleys weighed their rewards and their consciences, sensing that history might name them kingmakers or traitors, should fate turn again. As dusk settled, nightjars began to sing over marsh pools reflecting a crescent moon. Smoke from funeral pyres drifted in ribbons across the plain, and the distant bells of Leicester tolled Magnificat. Henry, exhausted yet unbroken, retired to the house of Thomas Collingbourne for the first night of his reign. Even then, the matters of a kingdom pressed close, arranging supply for loyal troops, pardons or penalties for great lords, secure transport for Richard's mother, Cecily Neville, aging and proud. Yet before quills scratched parchment, Henry knelt alone beside a guttering candle, thinking perhaps of his mother Margaret Beaufort's prophecy, of destinies spun before he drew breath. He had gambled everything on one field, 1 hour, one tilt of a white boar's head. Now the crown weighed tangible on his brow, and with it the unknowable burdens of establishing a dynasty amidst a realm fatigued of murder yet fertile with intrigue. In years to come, the battle's precise contours would blur beneath layers of retelling. Some chroniclers swore that Richard's last cry had been, "My kingdom for a horse." Others that he fell silently, eyes like glass. Archaeologists centuries later would exhume his twisted spine beneath a Leicester car park, measuring spinal curvature that Shakespeare embroidered into monstrous deformity. Yet these later echoes cannot erase the thunderclap moment when medieval England broke upon Bosworth's mire and the Tudor age began to assemble itself from the wreckage. Stand there today, on that quiet farmland, dotted with wildflowers and marked by a single jagged stone, and close your eyes. Hear distant drums, the whir of arrows, hooves splashing through marsh water, and a royal voice raised in defiant fury. Smell gunpowder and trampled mint. Feel the tremor in the ground as a king charges into legend. Then open your eyes to hedgerows humming with bees and a skyline pricked by church spires born after that cataclysm. The world has turned many pages since 1485. But the ink of Bosworth's reckoning remains fresh beneath the varnish of time, crimson, indelible, glinting when sunlight pierces memory. For in that clash, the Middle Ages yielded to a nascent modernity, and England learned that crowns may dangle by threads thinner than spider silk, waiting for the sharp tug of a single battlefield afternoon. So ends the tale of Bosworth Field, a story of courage and calculation, of a white boar's last stand and a red dragon's ascent, of lords who measured loyalty against survival, and of common soldiers whose blood nourished the roots of a new royal tree. It reminds us that history's turning points are not distant abstractions, but lived moments of terror and exaltation, when choices forged in muscle and heartbeat steer the course of nations. On 22nd August 1485, Under a sky that had witnessed 1,000 harvests, England awoke medieval and lay down Tudor, forever altered by the blade's breath between two men named Richard and Henry, one falling into silence, the other rising to carve his name upon the annals of an island kingdom.